All right, so the article first starts off with the Harvard Art Museum has many galleries full of brilliant works of art. Okay, so Harvard is in Boston. It has many galleries. Now, a gallery is basically a room or building especially for art.
That's right. It'll be big, probably very few walls, lots of windows and light and space for people to hang the art, walk around and look at the art. If you've been to a museum for art, we might also call that an art museum, and the galleries will be the big rooms inside. Now, Harvard, a lot of you know as a university, right? That's how I think. Harvard University, of course. I didn't know they had an art museum or an art gallery there, so I've already learned something new. Very cool. Let's keep reading though. It says, although it may not seem like it, small glass jars of color are just as impressive as any of the paintings. That is very unusual. Okay, so what do they have in this art gallery? Of course, they have paintings. That's what you would expect them to have. But here's what you wouldn't expect. Small glass jars of color. Interesting. I might expect that in an art store where I buy paints and things, but in a museum, very unusual. We have this noun jar. A jar is basically a small container that you use to hold things. They often have a lid on the top that you can tighten to open and close, and we often put things that are either dry or maybe a little bit wet into a jar. Things that are often found in jars, and you probably have at home, things like jam or peanut butter or honey, right? You open the top, you put your knife in, you put it on your bread, close the top up. That jar, which is round and a fairly good size, is great for holding things, and apparently you can also hold color in them. Very, very interesting. So for example, we could say, John went to the store to buy a jar of fresh coffee. Oh yeah, coffee in a jar, coffee beans.
Impressive is another word that we see here. It's an adjective and it means having the power to excite or grab the attention of others. So I'm going to ask you this. Can you lick your elbow? Can you throw a basketball from half of the court line? Or can you move objects with your mind? If you answered yes to any of these questions, well, that is very, very, very impressive. For example, we can also say, the magician had an impressive trick. He made the woman disappear.
Very, very interesting. So jars of color. Let's find out more about it by reading on. It says these jars found on the 4th floor of the museum make up the Forbes pigment collection.
Okay, makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how it ties into art. The Forbes pigment collection is a collection of jars with color. Well, what is pigment? Pigment is basically what gives color. Okay, so if you're going to the art store or the paint shop to buy different types of paint, well, of course, white paint, blue paint, yellow paint will be in different jars, different containers. But what makes it white, what makes it blue, what makes it yellow? The pigment that they use to actually make the paint. A lot of the other things in it will be the same. It's got to stick, it's got to dry quickly, it's got to look shiny, but the color is controlled by the pigment. So if you're actually making a dark purple and a light purple, you have to be very careful, like a chef, making the pigment just right.
That's right. Next in the article it says, the collection is a floor-to-ceiling wall of color gathered by Edward Forbes between 1910 and 1944. Okay, so he really likes his colors.
He spent 34 years collecting colors.
Yep.
Edward Forbes. I'm not sure I know that man.
Actually, when I first read this, I thought it meant Forbes as in the Forbes magazine
Oh,
guy.
Right. Yeah, the Forbes printing or publishing people. Not
actually,
them.
No, it's not them. This Edward Forbes is actually a scientist and he studied natural history. So that basically means he really likes to study plants, animals, fossils, and other living things. So he's kind of into biology, we can say.
Right, the natural sciences or natural history, as they might have called it back in his time. So he went around the world collecting different pigments or different colors, different ways of making color, and he did it a lot everywhere. It said Forbes collected the pigments during his world travels. including from places such as Pompeii in Italy and Afghanistan as well.
Super cool.
Wow, he was really a globe-trotting pigment collector.
Yeah. Huh. All right, next it says, Forbes became interested in collecting pigments when some of his own classic paintings began to fade. So this is what kind of sparked his interest. He was also a painter as well. I guess he was very interested in art, and he realized all of the colors on his paintings were slowly starting to fade away. Fade is a verb, and it means to lose freshness, strength, or color. For example, black can fade into the color white because it can go from black and slowly move on to the color gray and lighten and lighten and lighten until it becomes white. For example, we can also say the colors on the painting started to fade after 100 years.
Interesting. So he was just trying to save his own paintings, but this led him to become a bit of a painting scientist. Well, as it says, this led him to discover how paintings are actually made and preserved. Very, very interesting. To preserve something, this verb basically means to keep something in its original state, to keep it the way it was at the very beginning and to not let it change. Scientists often do this with important things you might see in a museum. They don't want the thing to sort of break down and fall apart slowly over time. They want people 100, 200, 300 years from now to see it the way it was when it was found. They want to preserve it or keep it in its protected original state. For example, scientists at the National Palace Museum work very hard preserving thousands of works of art. And they do a good job. That's why we can still see them, even though they're hundreds and thousands of years old in some cases.
So good. Thanks to them, we are very lucky that we're able to see these things as well. And also thanks to Forbes, we're also able to visit this museum because it says samples from the Forbes collection have been sent to museums and libraries around the world.
Very, very cool. So even if you have a painting that's sort of falling apart in Russia and you need a really special color, the Forbes collection might be the one to help you out. It says Forbes' work has been succeeded by scientists at the Harvard Art Museum's Strauss Center. All right, so that's another place that they're protecting art. Succeeded, well, basically means followed. This one was first, and then the other one succeeded that one. It followed afterwards. So we're showing the record of things or the placing of things in time and in history.
Next, the article says, there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they work on preserving masterpieces and perform tests on the pigments. So in another place inside or around Harvard, they want to try to keep these masterpieces. And what they do is they keep performing different tests. Now, a masterpiece is basically a work done with extraordinary skill. So it's something that someone made and they're like, that's the best thing I've made ever. For example, Michelangelo, he has a masterpiece and it's in the Sistine Chapel.
Ah, yeah, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is one of his most famous and greatest works. It's his masterpiece. To perform, this verb is used in a slightly different way than you might expect. We often use perform to talk about doing some kind of art performance, like acting, singing, dancing, playing a musical instrument. That's to perform, sure, but we also use it to talk about doing a specialized action. Okay, a magician will perform a magic trick, or a doctor could perform an operation. That means they're doing some kind of action, and usually it's a specialized, very specific action that not everyone can do. For example, the doctor performed the surgery well and saved the patient's life. Wow, so they really did a lot of science, right? They did a lot of different testing, 5 different tests. Now, why do they perform all those tests?
Well, the article says this reveals how people blended different colors to make new ones before synthetic pigments. So it's basically the science of color and how we get these different colors that we see today. When you reveal something, it means just to show something. Blend here means to mix.
And we also have the word synthetic in there. Yeah, a very important word when talking about things like colors that can be made in a variety of different ways. The earliest colors, of course, were natural. Something natural comes from nature. A plant or an animal, you can grow it, it's created by nature, it's natural. So some of the earliest colors were natural. For example, you know how they make the color yellow?
No.
Pee.
Ooh.
Pee-pee, that's right, meow meow, was collected, and then you could dip things in it, you know, shirts or whatever, and it would come out yellow. In fact, they still use a special animal to make the color red. Do you know what animal they use?
I'm hoping it's a bird.
Nope. The cockroach.
Oh,
the cockroach. If you see something called cochineal on a food or on something you might buy, that's actually made from cockroach shells. It's true. And then in the 1800s, the Germans invented the synthetic color industry. They're very good with chemicals and they could make them in a lab. They're made by people. They're made by machines. They're not made by nature. When we talk about synthetic, we're talking about things that are made by people, machines, in factories. For example, a very well-known synthetic material, plastic. Right? Plastic is not wood, it's not gold, it's not something that comes from the earth or from nature. It's made in factories out of oil and chemicals and things like that. It's synthetic. So a lot of the colors we use now, the black in your shirt, the brown in my pants, it's probably synthetic. But if we're talking about clothing or art from 200 or more years ago, it's mostly natural. And of course, that stuff breaks down over time. And if you're trying to fix an old painting by Da Vinci, he didn't use synthetic paint, synthetic color. He used natural color, so they need to fix them, to restore them, to preserve them using the same material. So how many different pigments, how many different color types do they have in this museum?
Well, actually, Forbes in the article says, in total, the Forbes collection contains over 3,000 pigments.
Wow.
I didn't know there were that many colors in the world,
That's amazing. There's many types of orange.
It's very impressive.
Yes, if you love color, paint, anything like that, this really sounds like a fascinating place to go. And you'd learn so much about colors, pigment making, and art history. Sounds really, really interesting.
All right, well, let's take a short break and we'll be back with our For You chat.